Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, education, business, really whatever gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com, joined, albeit remotely, today by Scott Barker, co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
Good morning, Jesse. Doing just fine. The weekend's getting ready to start because we are recording this on Friday, and we had a big week this past week, and looking forward to the holiday this week. So.
True enough, yes. And we are, apologies for any drop in audio quality this week. We are taping this remotely, just for some technical reasons here today. Hopefully next week we'll all be back together in the studio the way we like to do it. But for now, we're sitting home comfortably at our respective abodes. So that's not so bad. All right. Well, we do have some things to talk about this week. Matt Shears, the dynamic and impactful chair of the Knox County Democratic Party, made some news this week when he announced he is leaving town. We'll talk a little bit about what he has accomplished during his time here and what that means for the local party. Animal control responsibilities are going to be moving from law enforcement, Knox County Sheriff's Office and the Knoxville Police Department, to Young Williams Animal Shelter. There was some discussion about that this week. We will look at how all that's going to work. City of Knoxville still talking about housing, still talking about affordable housing, this time in a slightly different form. We will talk a little bit more about what they are calling NOAA. And to start us all off, I thought we could talk a little bit, Scott, about this relatively new organization that has arisen here locally called Knox for Liberty. As you might guess from the name, if you are paying attention to our local and national political landscape, this is a conservative group, a grassroots activist group. And we wrote about them this week because they organized their first real public event, which was a legislative town hall, and they invited in local lawmakers and candidates for office, basically to talk about and respond to the group's own priority list. They've come up with a set of 10 legislative priorities for the coming legislative session. And Scott, this was a fairly interesting meeting, I guess, in the sense that I feel like there's been kind of an explosion of groups like this around the country, around the state. At the state level, of course, there's an organization called Tennessee Stands that kind of came together during the pandemic, initially to fight against various kinds of pandemic mandates, but then also to just kind of advocate very aggressively for conservative priorities, particularly sort of a subset of like cultural conservative priorities. And we've seen manifestations of that here in different ways, but this is kind of the most organized effort, I would say, to really try to provide that voice here locally. And I guess one thing that strikes me is that maybe the reason we haven't seen this as much as some other places so far is that, like, Knox County is already pretty conservative, right? At least at the county level and in terms of our state delegation. But I don't know. I went to this meeting and wrote about it. I'm curious what your impressions are of this group from your slight remove as the person who edited the story.
Well, it's it is interesting. You're right. I mean, Knox County is overall fairly, a conservative stronghold, despite the city of Knoxville being leaning more Democratic. The county as a whole is very conservative, and and groups like this tend to be more active, and all when they're fighting against the something, the majority of what's the leadership or whatever, and it's kind of interesting that that they've organized and exactly, it's kind of like, they almost don't need to be organized here because you'd think because the Republican Party is the stronger of the two parties in Knox County. So
yeah, and that was one thing that the group said. So the chair is a woman named Tracy Smith, who has been locally active for a while. But she said that they see themselves as a nonpartisan group in the sense that their goal is to hold everybody accountable, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. And in a lot of ways, they're more focused on Republicans because, Republicans actually, as you say, they're the dominant party. They control all of the countywide offices and five
statewide offices too. I mean, that's
right. Yeah. And the statewide offices, obviously. And also, they are, just kind of like the dominant, if you want to be active in local politics at the county level, the Republican Party is already where the action is. But I think what this group wants to do is be another player in that kind of matrix so that as Republican candidates, say, are running for office or after Republican office holders get elected, this group wants to be among those who are vetting the candidates to make sure that they are sufficiently conservative and that are then kind of bringing pressure on office holders for the things that they've identified as their priorities. So to just, like I said, they have a 10-point priority list, and you can find the full, you can find a link to that in our coverage of it. But just to give an idea of the kinds of issues that they're particularly focused on, first of all, the Second Amendment. And you might think, like, how could Tennessee possibly be more pro-Second Amendment than it already is? And they kind of acknowledge that, but their big concern is anything that erodes that. And so the discussion about red flag laws, for example, that Governor Bill Lee has advocated for, they don't want anything like that. They don't want any limits whatsoever on firearms. It was interesting. One of the candidates who showed up for the panel is Daniel Herrera, the former Knox County Republican Party chair who is running for law director. He's challenging incumbent Republican law director David Book in the primary. And, Herrera, as anybody who's ever seen him give a public speech knows, is very much a red meat guy when it comes to talking about especially like cultural conservative issues. And remember, this is a guy running for law director. And he said, I love the Second Amendment. Literally, he said, I love the Second Amendment. I have a concealed carry permit. And he said, I carry everywhere that I can. And in places that I can't carry, you probably don't know that I'm still carrying. So you have somebody running for law director who's more intent on kind of showing his enthusiasm for guns than on actually, say, abiding by laws. Basically saying, even if I'm not supposed to carry, I'm going to carry there. And that got a big round of applause. Like, those were the kinds of statements and issues. There were, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 people there at this meeting. And that was the tenor of it. They talked about school vouchers. They're very pro voucher. One of the things that was interesting to me about that was, okay, so let's talk about who was there. As far as existing office holders, we had two state senators, Senator Richard Briggs and Becky Duncan Massey. We had State Representative Elaine Davis. There was a representative from Senator Marsha Blackburn's office, and then there was Herrera and Monica Irvine, who is a candidate running against Becky Duncan Massey in the Republican primary. And so there was a little bit of elbowing between Irvine and Massey, mostly from Irvine's side, kind of trying to make the case that she's the more true conservative in that race. And that came out in this school voucher conversation because Massey and Briggs actually have both been fairly skeptical of school vouchers. They have not been supporters of school vouchers. And I guess we'll see as the proposal moves forward that we talked about a little bit last week to expand the voucher program statewide, whether Massey and Briggs shift at all. But Massey basically said, I haven't seen that bill yet, what the details are going to look like for that statewide voucher expansion. So I'm waiting to see. Irvine took that as an opening and jumped right in and said, I don't think we need to overcomplicate this. But yes, we need universal vouchers. That money belongs to parents. Parents should be able to take money from the state and send their kids to whatever school they want. Let's just do it. And then Briggs sounded a sort of cautionary note in response. And I thought it was interesting the way he framed it, speaking to the audience he was speaking to, because he basically said, you might think this is great that you or your neighbors or whoever are going to be able to use a voucher to go to, some local private school or maybe a local Christian school. But he said, if we do this statewide, then anybody can open a school. And the examples he gave were, you could have a school that only serves the children of illegal immigrants and is taught entirely in Spanish. Do you want your money paying for that? And people were kind of like, no. They said, we have a lot of Chinese grad students at the University of Tennessee. They could start their own school taught in Chinese and you would have to pay for it and you wouldn't even know what they were saying. And people were like, no, we don't want that. So, it was an interesting dialogue there, because it was kind of like, even when the panelists were maybe somewhat pushing back against the priorities from the group, they still kind of were framing it in this way that they knew would kind of appeal to that specific demographic. Anyway. That was, it's kind of interesting that they, had to raise those possibilities, in this debate, because a lot of people do, don't consider, what would be possible if you do something, what the, I guess unintended consequences would be of doing that. And they're absolutely right. Anybody can open a school for anything, and the taxpayer money would go toward that school. And you can come up with all kinds of possibilities there, and you could open a woke academy.
Yes.
We're only going to teach woke things.
Yes, and be kind of. And there would be very little the state could do about it.
It depends on how that voucher law was written, but right. I mean, the state, if they do make this widely available, they are going to be subject to various kinds of anti-discrimination laws and everything. Like, the state is not going to be able to pass vouchers that can only be used in Christian schools, for example. That would not be constitutional. So we'll see, how much impact Knox for Liberty has going forward. But it was certainly interesting I want to give them credit because there's been a tendency for sort of conservative interest groups to organize online, often through Facebook pages, and they've tended to be a little bit shy about publicity. Like a lot of those groups have private membership only Facebook pages, for example, that you can only join if you're a member. And so a lot of their kind of organizing and discussion and so forth has happened a little bit out of public view. But now they were stepping out into the spotlight and saying, we want to be a public, ongoing part of the conversation. It's also interesting that at the same time they've gotten organized and going, our local chapter of Moms for Liberty, which is a school-focused, education-focused conservative group, has also gotten rejuvenated after being on sort of a hiatus for a little while. And those groups are somewhat related in the sense that there are a few people who are involved in both, including Sherry Garrett, who was active in our local anti-mandate movement and ran for school board the other year. So there is some overlap, but they are also actually separate groups. And we're just seeing more of that kind of organizing on the right here than we have in a little while. So we will see what happens there. Scott, let's talk about NOAA. We talked about this a bit last week. This is basically the city's effort to try to keep older apartments affordable and keep them from having big rent increases. So what are they doing?
Yeah, this kind of goes back to one of the things that's going on with the housing shortage here is rents are going through the roof. They're they've gone up 20% over the past year. They'll be going up another 5%. The projections are showing this year, and there's been a lot of there was a one particular apartment complex called Tanglewood. We got a new owner. It's now called Randit Tillery, and they did some minor renovations and doubled the rent on most of their tenants. Sparked a lot of outrage. Residents created a tenants organization that is now a tenants union that has been active, and it's and what has happened, and Kevin Dubose, who's the city's director of housing and neighborhood development, kind of put it well at the city council meeting last Tuesday, in that with this housing crisis, with there being really no supply and high demand, or low supply and high demand, owners of older apartment complexes that have been reasonably affordable in the past are raising their rents, and this is being a problem. So, I mean, the number of evictions are way up in Knox County, and it is a real serious problem, especially for people who kind of live paycheck to paycheck, having their rents go up. One of the interesting things that had been kind of lost in this is that there's so much of the existing housing stock that you could call affordable is basically not subsidized housing. It's apartments all throughout the city that are older, that are 50 or 60 or 70 years old, or even 30 years old. And so those are the ones that are where people have been living for a very long time. Not necessarily the same people, because people rent and then they buy, they rent, they buy, they rent, they buy. But people have been those apartments have been fairly affordable for a very long time, and there's a danger that they're not going to be, in the future. Now, the one thing about these rising rents, people have been there have been people who've been demanding action on part of the city, rent control always comes up. Well, rent control is illegal. You can't do that in Tennessee. There's nothing the city can do about that. But the city can make affordable housing an incentive. You can put together an incentive package that would require affordable housing. They've done that for years. We have many affordable housing complexes that are under construction now. Even the city council just approved 2 more a couple of weeks ago. And they can have incentives. They can require that, in exchange for the incentive, that you have to keep all or a portion of your units in what is defined as affordable. And that is basically 30% of the income of someone under 80% of the median income. It's a formula that anybody goes by. Basically, for a family of 3, it can be up to, depending on how it's written, up to $50,000 a year or more as the household income. So, but and what the city has done, what the Kincannon administration decided to do was, well, we will extend what these incentive programs that we have been using for new affordable housing developments to existing affordable housing, which means all of these older apartment buildings. And so essentially, it's not. We don't have a lot of details on how they're going to do it. They asked for permission or authority to make some changes to make this happen. But there will be an incentive program for these people who own apartment complexes that are 20, 30, 40, 50 years old and older. It'd be very, very similar to what already exists. As the primary incentive is a payment in lieu of tax agreement, which essentially freezes property taxes at current levels. And this would be done in exchange for, and it would be put in the deeds, and they would have to do this in exchange for keeping rents at a certain level. And that would vary from development to development. Keep those rents affordable at affordable levels for an extended period of time, 10, 20, 30 years. So that's the basic way that would work. They could involve projects where the owner can use that to help renovate their apartments, but then they would still be required to keep rates lower. It's unclear, of course, at this point how many property owners would take advantage of that. One would think that a lot of them would, if they have if they need to do upgrades to their facilities or their apartment complexes. It would be a way to do that without disrupting their tenants, and it would be a wash for them. They would, instead of raising rents, they just would pay less in taxes. And so there was quite a bit of discussion on that on last Tuesday. For the most part, council members were supportive of that. It passed unanimously with one abstention. Amelia Parker, who speaks often about being wanting supporting more affordable housing, actually abstain. She said she needed more information on details, and those are actually going to be coming. Like I said, this gives the administration the authority to come up with more detailed proposals. If anything has to do, there have to be budget changes, if there have to be any ordinance changes in order to do this, those will be coming back probably in December for council to consider. But that is another, and this isn't designed to add to the amount of affordable housing Knoxville has. It's designed to keep Knoxville from losing affordable housing. So,
right. Yeah, well, and just to reemphasize the point that you were making, because we've had this question whenever we talk about development incentives and affordable housing and all of that, somebody will say, but I thought the city couldn't require affordable housing, rent control, any of that stuff. And that's correct. The city cannot require any of this. They are allowed by state law to create voluntary incentive programs that developers can use if they want to. And then if the developers choose to do it, the city can then impose some requirements like, well, if you want this particular incentive, you have to, in this case, it would be, keeping your rents at a certain level for a certain number of years and so forth. But it's not mandatory. All of it is totally voluntary, and whatever they set up, it'll just be up to individual property owners or developers, as you're saying, to decide whether that works for their bottom line. Because even with this kind of incentive, I mean, if you look at the kind of rents that people are getting now, like, as you say, doubling those rents at the old Tanglewood complex, even with these kinds of incentives, it's entirely possible that some property owners are going to say, nah, like it still works out better for my bottom line to just, upgrade the apartments and then double the rent. I'm still going to do better on that than if I get this kind of tax freeze, but have to keep my rents lower.
Yeah. That's going to depend on each individual property owner, what their positions are, what their financial situation is, what their debt situation is. All kinds of things would play into that. It has to be clearly stated, yes, that these are voluntary. This doesn't automatically mean that everybody who owns an apartment building in Knoxville suddenly has their taxes frozen. That's not what's going to happen. It is done on an individual basis. These projects, the owners would approach the city and say, what can you do? What can we do? And then they would sit down and negotiate, where the property taxes would be frozen. And that's really a misnomer. It's not really freezing a property taxes. What it is you literally make payments that aren't considered taxes. It's payment in lieu of taxes, but it's a negotiated amount that is at least what they're currently paying in taxes. And that's negotiated. The rents that they could charge would be negotiated, and all of that's voluntary. If the developer decides that the rents wouldn't work, then they wouldn't have to go through with it. So it is voluntary. And on the other side, there are a lot of housing advocates who are concerned about, well, what keeps property owners from saying, okay, I'll do this. They get the tax break, and then they raise rents anyway. Well, they won't be able to do that. What happens in these situations is the affordability part, the rent rental levels go into the deed. That's part of the legal requirement of the deed of the property. And that, for example, if an owner does this and it's a 15-year period that they're going to have their taxes frozen, then after 5 years they decide to sell, the new owner has to abide by that because it's in the deed. So there are safeguards to make sure that the voluntary that the owners don't renege on their their promise to voluntarily keep rates low. So.
Right. Well, just another tool in the toolbox, basically, the city is looking for. We've talked about a lot of different ways that they're trying to, some big steps, some smaller ones. This one is probably on the smaller side of its actual impact in terms of the numbers of units that it might affect. But it just shows that the city is looking for kind of anything they can do to try to keep housing more affordable.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things that is kind of emerged over the last couple of months is that there's been a lot of criticism of the city's not doing enough for the housing situation, and that's been a persistent criticism. And one thing is one of the major complaints that comes up with no matter what that's been proposed is that it doesn't go far enough. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things is, and really it taken individually, no, like this will not solve the housing supply situation. This will not, it won't prevent all older, more affordable apartment complexes from raising rents. But it's designed to, now whether it does it or not is a different story, but it's designed to at least keep some from dropping out of the affordable housing mix. But it's not the end all be all. Then we've talked a lot about the middle housing proposal, which is going to be back up in front of Planning Commission in December. There was a measure that addressed the middle housing also last week in City Council. One of the that had to do with extending it to RN1 zones in these older neighborhoods where the mayor's proposal is putting it out there, and it was only. I mean, there are only 51 lots, in this that would be affected by, or empty lots that would be affected by this, although the entire zones would. And it just if half of those got middle housing, duplexes, triplexes, whatever, that's fewer than 30.
Right.
And so that doesn't really make a big impact. But I mean, the point is, no, of course it doesn't. But it does do what it does, and the administration, and I'm not sure they've done a really. I don't know if they haven't done a good job communicating this, or people aren't hearing what they're trying to say. I don't know what the disconnect is, but there is apparently no big overarching thing. There are a lot of little things that they're able to do, and a lot of people are frustrated because the problem is acute. It is. It can be the difference between having a home and being homeless for many people. I mean, the half the renters in Knox City of Knoxville, half the people in the city of Knoxville rent essentially, and half of them, which is a quarter of the population, is rent burdened or cost burdened in housing, which means they pay more than 30% of their incomes for their housing. So it's very these are people that work and have a place to live, and they're trying to make their way, and they're only a couple of months of maybe even 1 month away from not being evicted from from an apartment if they lose their job or they get their hours cut back or whatever, and then that adds to the situation with homelessness. And so we've, and people expect the city to do more than what it's doing. And they want something more dramatic a lot of people want something more dramatic than what they've seen so far.
Right. All right. Well, I'm sure there will continue to be lots to talk about on the housing front here.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things about housing too is a lot of there's no way to snap your fingers and have more housing because it takes to build an apartment building. Once you go through all the approvals and permitting and everything, it's still going to take you a year to build it.
Sure.
So anything that is planned right now isn't going to open up and actually put a roof over people's heads for another year.
Yeah.
So that's it is something that we will that people will be talking about and will be covering for the foreseeable future.
Okay. Also, some discussion this past week of animal control. And I guess most people probably know what animal control is. It's the service that responds if you call 911 about an animal-related issue. That could be, loose dogs in the neighborhood, barking dogs. They get a lot of calls about barking dogs. Really kind of anything animal related that people call about. Currently, those services are provided by law enforcement. The Knox County Sheriff's Office and Knoxville Police Department each have animal control units. They handle them a little bit differently. The Sheriff's Office, those are actually sworn officers. For KPD, that is a civilian unit. They are not sworn KPD officers, but they do work for the police department. It's a division of the police department. And what's going to happen now is Young Williams Animal Shelter, which is the nonprofit that provides animal shelter services to both the city and county, is going to take over animal control as well. And so this will have to be approved by both county commission and city council. It's up at commission first. Commission will be voting on that this coming week, but they had discussion of it at their work session last week. And this wasn't a new idea. It was basically announced earlier this year that Young Williams was going to be working toward doing this. And Janet Testerman, who is the CEO of Young Williams, told county commissioners that this is something that actually a lot of animal shelters around the country do run their own animal control units. And from her point of view, it makes sense to kind of, bring the whole operation in-house more or less, because, of course, they are already, they're dealing with animal control every day. They are the place that animal control brings animals to. And so they feel like by having actual direct control and authority for the response, not that they were criticizing the way the city or county have been doing it, but they think that they'll be able to maybe take a little bit more of a proactive response because they have, animal experts who understand what kinds of resources are available or the best ways to respond in some of these situations, partly with the goal of having fewer animals come to the actual shelter. That by having their own people out there responding to these calls, they can on the spot determine is there an option here where we can maybe find the owner if this animal has an owner, scan for a microchip, see if they have that, maybe negotiate with an owner who is maybe in violation of some of our animal welfare codes, for example, the one that the city just passed restricting people keeping dogs on ropes or leashes in the yards and so forth. But, maybe try to negotiate and talk to the owners to get them into compliance without having to take their animals away from them, which they would prefer not to do if there's a way to keep the animal where it is and have them be safe. So it's just kind of, from Testerman's point of view, just a logical expansion of the work that Young Williams already does. And not insignificantly, a very welcome thing from both the law enforcement agencies, because they would prefer to focus on basically anything else than barking dogs or, rabid possums or whatever the other kinds of things they get called on. They'd rather leave that to the animal people and let, the law enforcement agencies deal with serving the human population. Knoxville and Knox County. So there was no controversy about it. They are going to the city and county each under the contract will be paying Young-Williams to do this, because they're going to have to hire in 17 officers, which is basically about what currently exists between the city and county agencies right now. So it's going to be about $1.2-1.3 million a year, split evenly between the city and county contracting with Young-Williams to do this work, plus some startup costs that they'll pay for them and so forth. But the net result of all of that is that, assuming this goes forward and is approved by both the city and the county, if you call animal control or you see animal control units out and about in the community, those will no longer be law enforcement officials. They are going to be employees of Young-Williams.
Yeah, unless people, think this is kind of a minor thing. I mean, one of the things that you reported on this is that Young-Williams takes in about 1,300 animals a year, and about 30% of those are from animal control. So we're basically talking about 4,000.
It's actually 1,300 a month. Yeah, they take in
a month. And I'm sorry, I looked at the numbers wrong. It's about 13,000 a year, or 11,300 a year. It's early in the morning when we're taping this, folks. Sorry about that. But so we're talking over 4,000, a year, animals that animal control handles. So it's a pretty big, issue for them to address, and it's no wonder that the law enforcement agencies want to get out of this. One thing too, and this will be a little footnote before we head on to other things. Mentioned that Janet Testerman is the CEO of Young-Williams. She's also a city council member, as most readers probably know, and she will be still be a city council member. She is leaving city council. She did not run for re-election, and Debbie Helsley is going to be assuming her seat. But this is going to be my understanding. They haven't issued the agenda for the first meeting in December, the only meeting in December. It's going to be on that agenda. And she will most likely recuse herself. I don't know if she necessarily has to, but she probably will. But just to note for the record that, yes, Janet Testerman is not only the CEO of Young-Williams, she is a city council member. I don't think that's a really big deal, but it needs to be noted for the record.
Yeah, she's for one more month, basically.
One more month, she's a city council member, and there's really, if you look outside of law enforcement, there is no other group that could handle this on this scale than Young-Williams. I mean, they are the only game in town there, so it's not. It's one of those things that and those kinds of things happen from time to time. But like I said, it didn't bother county commission at all. I doubt it would bother the other city council members that this is going to Young-Williams. So
I think they just want to know that when their constituents call somebody to come deal with an animal issue, that somebody's going to show up. And
yes, somebody's going to,
whatever uniform they may be wearing.
So somebody is going to come and take the stray dog in their yard away and take care of them and hopefully find a home for them,
right?
Or reunite them with their own home. So
ideally, for sure.
Ideally.
Okay, Matt Shears, Knox County Democratic Party chair. We have had him here on the podcast. He has been a significant figure in the local political landscape in recent years. He's in his second term as county chairman right now, and lots of people have given him lots of credit for injecting new energy vitality, I guess you could say youth, because he's a pretty young guy himself, into the county party, which of course is very much still a minority party in Knox County. But under Scheer's leadership, the county Democrats have really been making a push and trying to contest as many races as possible, and have had some gains that Matt certainly talked about when he was on this show before. But he announced this week that he's leaving, and there was sort of lamenting and wailing from a lot of local Democrats who have been happy with his performance. There was not any public celebrating among Republicans that I saw, but I can imagine that there was a certain amount of relief there because, Scott, I don't know about you, but I have heard as many compliments for Matt Scheer from Republicans in recent years as I have from Democrats. I think Republicans have also seen him as a fairly effective local leader.
Yeah, I think they have, and I agree with you. Yes, I have heard quite a bit from Republicans who've said that they might say it through gritted teeth, but they really they acknowledge that Scheer's has been a big part of kind of the rejuvenation of the local Democratic Party. Local Democrats for a long time have been, in the minority here in countywide, and but they have done a better job running good candidates actually for some of these seats. They might not win, but they've been legitimate for the most part. Been legitimate candidates with intelligent, straightforward. They have run into the Republican buzzsaw, and but they've been able to run a lot of really good candidates and made progress, especially inside the city limits. People forget that 25 years ago, the city was tended to vote conservative and was and over the last few years, especially, the Democratic Party and conservative and kind of more progressive liberal candidates and nonpartisan races in the city have done very well. So the party's been raising a lot more money and being more active. So I'm sure that there probably is a little bit of silent celebrating on the Republican side and some concern on the Democratic side. He's going to be replaced by C.J. Butcher, who's the vice chair for now, at least. He's going to be replaced by C.J. Butcher, and the hope on the Democratic side is Butcher will be able to can carry on that momentum that Scheer's has. You can't say he's entirely responsible for, but he's certainly been a big part of.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I feel like the reinvention of the local Democratic Party really got going, sort of a decade plus ago during the Obama era, to a significant degree, thanks to the leadership of Gloria Johnson, who was the county chair for a while before she ran for office herself. And of course, she's now running for U.S. Senate. But, like a lot of Democratic Party organizations across the South, it has had to kind of reinvigorate itself, not just by bringing in younger people and younger generations of leadership, but really kind of refocusing itself a bit from the old, what we called the yellow dog Southern Democrats, which was by contemporary standards, certainly very much kind of conservative Democrats, which is, we talk about how sort of more moderate Republicans have been somewhat squeezed out of the Republican Party. Well, conservative Democrats have also kind of been squeezed out of the Democratic Party. And the modern Knox County Democratic Party, starting with Johnson and then through a couple of other leaders, including the late Cameron Brooks, and now culminating in Matt Scheer's has really done this complete rebranding, I guess you could say, as a modern, progressive, liberal Democratic Party. They are no longer trying to be. Now, Matt Shears has taken a very sort of big umbrella approach. Anybody who wants to run as a Democrat, he's willing to talk to them. And, certain districts are more amenable to sort of certain kinds of candidates and everything. He understands all of that. But still, the party as a whole, the Knox County Democratic Party, is now, I would say, very much in line kind of ideologically and priority-wise with the National Democratic Party, with the state Democratic Party. And it is a contemporary progressive party, basically.
I think there was a tendency among Democrats during the shift to Republican dominance in the state to basically focus on the areas where they would be considered conservative. They could appeal to conservative voters, but as in many instances like this, I mean, they were even conservative Democrats are conservative light, compared to Republicans. And I think that they just have kind of embraced, okay, this is what our party is about, and we're not going to try to pretend that otherwise. And I think that people have responded to that because it seems like it's a more genuine approach, and they've been very successful. I don't know, part of that is the rural urban divide, and part of it is where they're strong in stronger in cities generally than they used to be. Or that it's the city of Knoxville, for example, is growing for the first time in decades, and a lot of people are moving here, and who knows how big of a role that's played in the rejuvenation of the Republican Party. I mean, Matt Shears himself, we didn't talk about why he's leaving. Really, he's leaving to move back to North Carolina, where he's originally from, and going to go back to the family farm that has been in the family for 250 years. And there's been an infusion, I think, of new blood into the Democratic Party locally that's really helped, and he's been a big part of that.
Yeah, and we should say C.J. Butcher is also quite young, kind of maintaining that youthful face for the party, and has been kind of a protege of Shears's. And I think what Shears hopes is that he's put in place enough of an infrastructure to kind of carry that energy and momentum forward. So we will see what happens there. But on a personal, professional note, Matt's always been very approachable, and we appreciate his thoughts and insights whenever we reach out to him for comment on things. Well, Seth, I think we can just kind of keep going here. We would maybe normally take a break at this point, but we actually have a pretty short agenda today. Looking ahead to next week, not a huge amount going on because it is a holiday week. County Commission is meeting on Monday. They moved that meeting up a week to get it before Thanksgiving, so they don't all have to meet the Monday after Thanksgiving. And we talked about the animal control contract that they'll be voting on. The other major issue on Commission's agenda Monday is the ambulance contract, which we have talked about at some length here, but they have a proposed contract with American Medical Response, who is their current ambulance provider, but this would be a new contract to cover the next 5 years for AMR to provide response here. At the work session last week, there were still a good number of questions for AMR, some skepticism from county commissioners that, people have not been completely thrilled with performance under the current contract. As we have talked about, there have been some long wait times sometimes to have an ambulance show up because of staffing issues that they're dealing with, and also because of long wait times that the ambulances are facing at our local hospitals. At the same time, several of the commissioners who had questions or concerns also kind of acknowledged that they don't have a lot of option other than approving this contract right now because the current contract expires at the end of January. They need to get something in place. They went through a whole bid and evaluation process, and this was the recommendation that came out of that. So the most likely thing is that there will be a vote to approve that at Monday's commission meeting, but probably there will be some more discussion about it. Maybe there will even be some proposals to add some reporting requirements or something to the contract. We'll see. That meeting is at 5 p.m. Monday in the main assembly room of the City County building. And then, of course, what else is happening next week, Scott? We have Thanksgiving.
We do have Thanksgiving. Really, it's the holiday that is all about eating, which I kind of like. So, it's not really celebrating a whole lot more other than family and food. So,
family, food, drink, football. Don't forget football.
Can't forget football. It's I hate to publicly talk about being an Alabama fan, but it's going to be Iron Bowl weekend for Alabama fans. So the Alabama-Auburn game. So Thanksgiving is a high holy day for Alabama fans and fans of that school to the south. So
I would wish you well, except I won't.
I know. Well, nobody does. I'm used to that in Knoxville. When it comes to football, nobody likes me, and that's okay.
And then, of course, after we get through Thanksgiving, immediately after we get through Thanksgiving, the Christmas season kicks off, and we'll have the various downtown Christmas events and features and so forth. If you've been downtown in recent weeks, you have seen they are building the skating rink on Market Square. That's going to come back. The tree is up in the Cruce Park extension. It is, in fact, beginning to look a lot like Christmas. And
Christmas in the city started Friday.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, with the city gets a head start on Christmas. So they've already started. So yeah, Christmas is going to be a lot of events going on as always, and so it's going to be and it's one of those times where the news kind of slows down a little bit most of the time, and I don't want to predict too much, but we'll have lots of holiday events to take its place. So.
And we will be back next week, probably with a somewhat abridged podcast episode, just because we don't, in fact, expect a tremendous amount of news to happen.
Basically, it's Thanksgiving week, so that's 3 working days, but really only 2 possible news days. Because
by the time you get to Wednesday, there's not a lot of work getting done.
Everybody, they might clock in on Wednesday, but they're really not there. So
So I guess we should say that let's hope we don't have a lot to talk about next week, because if we do end up with a lot to talk about, it will probably mean something bad has happened somewhere. So
yes, that is true. So.
But regardless, we'll come back and give you a recount of our Thanksgiving meals. I'm really cranberry pie this year for the first time. I'll let you know.
Goodness. Who knows what we'll end up doing? So, whatever it is, we'll be enjoying it with family, and we will be eating a lot. So,
amen to that. All right. Well, thanks as always to Seth Barber providing remote production services this week at Barbarian Studios. Thanks to Will Wright, who wrote our theme music. And happy Thanksgiving, everybody. We'll be back to talk to you next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point Podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.